We are live, episode 299 of the See You on the Other Side podcast. And so joining Wendy and I today is the chief investigator for the Southern California Mutual UFO Network, as well as a man after our own hearts because he's a musician. We'd like to welcome a longtime UFO stalwart, Earl Grey, to the show today. Earl, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
All right. Well, it's a rainy day.
Is it rainy? Where are you guys at? You're in Wisconsin or something? I forget.
Yeah,
that's right.
Madison, Wisconsin.
Madison, Wisconsin. And we heard it never rains in Southern California.
That's not true. We're supposed to get it tomorrow, actually. We're supposed to get a rainstorm, which will be nice, actually. It's pretty warm out today. So I have my fan going on in the corner here just to kind of keep it so it's not too hot.
Nice.
So. Interesting hat tip to Hal Aaron from the Tales of the Road Warriors podcast, because Hal is the guy who said to me, he's like, you know who you got to talk to if you're into UFOs and music and everything, you got to talk to Earl Grey. And
that's so sweet. That's so cool.
and so how did you meet Hal?
Facebook. He's another Facebook friend. Seems to be the one, social media is the one way where we can get around, distance and everything else.
Sure.
I mean, imagine what it would be like right now, how difficult social distancing would be if we didn't have social media right now. It would be...
Right, we'd all be going nuts. We'd be going more nuts.
Yeah,
I'm
going
pigeons
nuts anyway. Yeah, pretty much.
I think we should start at the beginning, Earl. Where are you from originally, and how did you start getting into a subject like UFOs?
I'll tell you. I'm a Southern California native. I've lived here all of my life. And the way that I got into UFOs, it was kind of a slow trip that led me to them. My mom, she used to work for Howard Hughes. She was one of Howard Hughes's two personal secretaries.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And she worked for Hughes Aircraft back in the mid-1950s. And she did dictation for them. She was a really amazing at doing shorthand. She would, you'd look at my mom's old shorthand notes, and it would look like, it was pretty impressive. You couldn't read her grocery list, but it'd be a big long grocery list, and it would just be a bunch of scribbles, and so anyhow, my mom, she had a high security clearance, as you have to have in that situation, and she would be in these high powered meetings with the military, and really, Howard Hughes was I think pretty much the first guy in aerospace that was part of the military-industrial complex. Like, so my mom was
he was the Robert Bigelow of his time.
He was the Robert Bigelow of his He had an interest in UFOs. That's not really well known out there, but that he was friends with Wernher von Braun. A lot of the he was part of the Operation Paperclip, where after World War II, we kind of split the rocket scientists between Russia and ourselves. And Hughes Aircraft, they were very much involved in this. And as you know, Russia, they beat us into outer space, and we were really kind of trailing them. I mean, Sputnik, when they shot that satellite up, and it was really just a silver ball that beeped. It didn't do anything.
Right. And what was the name of we had a particular like satellite that like spectacularly failed, didn't we? Was that the Vanguard?
Telstar, I think.
Telstar, yeah. It was like, when Sputnik went up, it was like, okay, we got to go after the Russians. And then what happens is, it was like, boo. It was the fail whale in space.
we had some problems, and we had problems catching up, and so it was the most important thing to our government, because we knew that if they could send a little ball that beeped up there, they could also technically send up a nuclear warhead or something, and so it was our number one thing, but anyhow, I grew up hearing these stories about, I was always very, very interested in the space program and in outer space. It just seemed like I had this propensity for it. I was the kid where my dad built this really beautiful, elaborate wooden swing set that we had in our backyard. And I was maybe 3.5 years old, and I took the leftover wood and sort of hammered and nailed it together into a reasonable facsimile of what I thought a spaceship would look like, right? Drew the little control panel on the front of it.
Fun.
And had my dad haul this thing up to the top of the swing set, which, of course, parents would never do now. We're helicopter parents nowadays, and paranoid above being paranoid of our
just
kids
the idea of my 3-year-old daughter with a hammer scares the crap out of me. So when you're talking about, oh yeah, I was working on this, building it myself, and I'm like, nope, she'd kill herself or probably kill me.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, so I had this thing up on top of the swing set, and my mom always would remind me, and I remember this myself. I remember climbing up there, and I was waving at the sky singing, and my mom said, "Earl, who are you waving at? Who are you singing to?" And I told her, I said, "I'm waving at the space people, Mom. I'm singing to the space people."
Nice.
And I guess that it's kind of funny. Here I am, as almost 60 years later, I'm still kind of doing the same thing, singing to the space people and waving to them, trying to get some response. But I think my mom, she saw that I had this interest that seemed to be bred into me. Mm-hmm. So she started telling me stuff that she definitely wasn't supposed to be telling me. She told me about that she'd worked in this deep underground a laboratory, but it was more or less, she called it a city that was under the desert. And she told me this story up until she started working in aerospace again back in the 1970s. I think that she felt like she didn't have to protect her security clearance because she was kind of done with it. She, and she wanted to tell me this stuff. So she told me that they took her out to the desert, that she had a little security detail, that there was a shack that was in the middle of the desert, and that they walked into what looked like more or less a little pump house, and there's this elevator. And the elevator went down. It didn't go up, obviously. There wasn't a skyscraper involved, right, like you'd normally have with it. She said it was just like an Otis elevator, plain old elevator. So, and they didn't give her any, they didn't tell her what to expect when they sent her out, So obviously I think they were trying to see how my mom would react to being in a strange situation like this. So she said that the elevator started up, and she thought it would maybe go down a floor or two, and she started getting butterflies in her stomach, is the way she described it. And she said the doors opened up, and there was a little city there under the desert. Now, she never told me if it was, the Nevada desert or Utah. She'd never told me that. She just said the middle of nowhere in the great American desert.
That's awesome.
She said there was a little city, and they had people that lived there, that had a lot of people that lived down there, and they had barber shops and cafes. She said they had one little French cafe where they had, she laughed. She said they had these tables with umbrellas like you'd see on a sidewalk cafe.
That's great.
And you don't really need an umbrella if you're in a cave. It's quote unquote what she said, But my mom talked about this, which was one strange story. And the other weird story that she told me was that we were not alone, that the government knew that there were other intelligences in the universe, and that the government was very well aware of this, and that it was unequivocal, that it wasn't a question. So my mom would she was there. Now there was another time where my aunt came over, and she brought over the new Look magazine. It wasn't Life magazine. Sometimes I call it Life magazine, but that's wrong. It was Look magazine, which was sort of the knockoff of Life magazine. That
Sure,
they
it
had
was like a photo magazine. Like it was, it was
Yeah.
something where it was renowned for the fact that people would take great pictures. And in the
Yes.
days before the internet, before Instagram, when you were all wowed by everybody's, like seeing a beautiful photograph meant something when you couldn't get portrait mode on your iPhone 10.
And you had to pay for every single exposure that was developed. So
Right. Well, my aunt brought over the new issue of Look. I think it was around 1968. I'm not sure if it was summertime or wintertime because, as you were saying earlier, it never rains in Southern California, And it was, but I just remember it was pretty hot outside, and my cousin and I, we were out playing with I had a new Lost in Space toy set, so I was there playing with that. So it might have been after Christmas, but I'm not sure. But my cousins and I were out there, and we heard this heated argument going on in the kitchen. So we snuck around the corner. We're standing there by the door. My mom and my aunt didn't know that we were there. My aunt brought over the issue of Look magazine that told the story of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, which was the first alien abduction case in history that people know about anyway.
Yeah, that's the classic one.
Yeah.
And when you hear the audio tapes of it, and like they used hypnotic regression to get at what happened to him. It's missing time. It's like it is the template, I think, for which all alien abduction stories kind of have followed in the past 54 years. It's
the proverbial alien abduction story. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember my aunt was very, she was rolling her eyes, and she thought that, she said, this is like a bad movie. I don't believe it. And I remember my mom saying, actually, with my background and some of the stuff that I've heard, I think that this could actually be true. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, this might actually be a real thing. And I remember my aunt was reading the book and said, well, they stuck a needle in the woman's navel. And I had to elbow my cousin. It's like, what's a navel? What's a navel? He said, her belly button. Her belly button.
Oh, cute.
And then I remember I just sort of sweat came out on my forehead, and the feeling. It's like if you accidentally stick your hand into a spider web or something. It's the first time that I ever remember feeling like the willies and thinking that when I would think of space people, I would think of other intelligences. At that age, I was thinking of the Great Gazoo from the Flintstones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Little green men with antennae and something, it's not, but this sounded dangerous. It sounded scary, and it sounded, suddenly my universe kind of expanded. So that's where my interest in UFOs came from. It came from my mom. It was a generational thing. Now, she would not tell me as I got older. She just clammed up, zipped lips, because she wasn't supposed to tell me this stuff, especially because I did sort of a show and tell in fourth grade, where what do your parents do? And I sort of gave a little synopsis of what my mom had done.
Spilled the beans.
Yeah, you let it out on.
And they had a parent-teacher conference, and my mom afterwards said, "Earl, I'm supposed about this, and you can't tell people. Your mom could really get into terrible trouble." She said, "I could go to jail, because this is supposed to be secret. People don't know about this." So the rest of my mom's life was just me trying to get more information out of it, and when I took her to see the movie Star Wars, and strangely enough, she just kind of spilled, and she said, you have no idea how close to reality that is, Earl, that there are different races, that the spaceships and all the different cultures. She said, it's realer than you will ever know. And I think that's what finally drove me to join MUFON and become a field investigator was that phrase, it's realer than you will ever know, because I wanted to know,
Yeah. I want to know. I want to go find Earl,
It's
your mom's probably passed.
Yes, she passed away in 1990.
But I want to go back in time and interrogate her.
Me too.
She knows the
it's
stuff.
almost like she set you up for this career, you know? Like
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know
she made you just curious enough.
horrified or thrilled with what I'm doing right now. I really don't know how she would have felt about it. And probably a little of both, maybe, you know.
But I think that also, I mean, maybe she wanted you to pursue the truth. She knew that she had something to lose, especially if you, I mean, think about the culture of secrecy that accompanied the, the CIA and the Department of Defense. And, we think about the Cold War. You think about, spies taking suicide pills and all that kind of stuff. And the culture of secrecy, and saying that the planet hangs by a thread with these two superpowers who could annihilate each other at any time. When you are showing about the imbalance of power that alien technology could bring, that is something where people would say, this is a secret you need to protect with your life.
Yeah.
And I can see why your mother would be like, I can't talk about it, but if you follow this path, Earl, maybe one day you'll find the truth and you'll be able to help reveal it. But the fact
I
that
think that may have been the subtext there. I think perhaps you're right.
But I love your mom working for Howard Hughes and, working in a underground bunker in the desert.
That's so cool.
in the YouTube,
especially back in that time.
Right. And this is a good time. So in the YouTube chat, Sam says underground umbrellas, a condensation problem, maybe, for dealing with that. And that's somebody's thinking, why would they have umbrellas in a cave?
I think they just wanted to make them feel comfortable. It's like a French cafe. You have the little umbrellas over the tables,
It reminds me of Las Vegas when you go into Paris or Caesars or one of those where they have the fake ceiling, like the sky on the ceiling, and then they have little streets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these people were underground for long periods of time, apparently. And my mom said she knew Werner von Braun. She talked about him as, she said he was a charming man. So apparently, and I really don't know what she was doing under the desert. I wish I knew. I wish I knew what they were trying to figure out down there. She said that it was esoteric projects was about the closest I could get her to tell me what they were actually doing. In the course of my travels, I've met a friend of another guy whose mom was supposedly the other secretary, because Hughes had two personal secretaries. And she told her son the same story. This guy was a RAF pilot. I can't really give you any more than that on him because he's scared. He doesn't even want to talk to me. Doesn't even want to talk with me. But I've seen emails between himself and his friend, which confirmed, because it was from a couple years back before I had talked with his friend. And it told the same story. His mom said that that there was a catwalk over the main laboratory so that you could walk over and see things that were going on. And she said that it was like something out of James Bond, except real, was his mother's words for it. Now, his mom didn't talk about alien intelligence. She just talked about the underground base and Howard Hughes' part in that.
But even the underground base is something, that I think a lot of us would be interested in. And what was Werner von Braun like? They have have you watched Project Blue Book at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm friends with Paul Hynek is a good friend of mine.
Okay, so, fantastic.
Yeah.
And so, Werner von Braun's kind of like they portray him in a, as, a bad guy. But I think it's interesting there, though, that they're taking all these people from history, J. Allen Hynek, Werner von Braun, and they're taking the cases that he worked on, that J. Allen Hynek worked on, and making a fairy tale out of it.
Yes, because it is not a documentary. It's not,
no,
it's not even a docudrama. It's very, it's based in reality, but it's not like Dr. Hynek ever ran after aliens with a gun or anything. And what Paul says about the show is he's a consultant on the show, and he said that if they did a documentary on his father, it wouldn't be a TV show because it would be him sitting behind a desk with a pile of papers.
Not exactly fine entertainment, right?
It's not gonna be that exciting. It's not Littlefinger looking at like an alien in the Erlenmeyer flask or whatever he was looking at in the show. So I mean that's a really interesting origin story, right? I mean, right there. Like most of us are like, well, why'd you like UFOs? It's like, well, because I watched In Search Of, and Leonard Nimoy told me that there could be aliens out there, and I thought that was cool. You're like, no, my mom told me that there are aliens out there because she used to work for the notorious Howard Hughes. And you're like, all right then.
Yeah.
So, when you joined MUFON, what was, maybe one of your first significant, where you answered the reports? And it does seem like a lot of reports are not necessarily crackpots, but sometimes it's well-meaning crackpots. Sometimes it's just people who are, don't realize that what they saw was swamp gas in the sky. But what was the first time where you investigated an encounter and you're like, okay, this goes deeper than I thought, and I can't explain it? Do you remember that first time and maybe the feeling of it?
Yeah, that there's, and you're correct. Going back to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and we use a lot of his precepts in how we approach our UFO cases. And Hynek said 90 to 95% of all UFO reports are prosaic, that they can be explained. And they're usually, somebody misunderstood something they saw, like a jet afterburner. Especially now, we get a lot of drone reports, personal drones and stuff.
Kites.
Kites. And sometimes you get intentional hoaxers, too. But I think the first case that I had that really that made it all worth it, I'd been doing this for about maybe 6 months. And I had a case where a gentleman and his family had been abducted from their car in the middle of the desert. They were out near China Lake area in Southern California in the high desert. And
so how far that, just to give us, maybe those of us who've been to California a bunch of times but still don't know a lot of the outlying areas, like how far is that away from civilization maybe, or what we would think of as, like a landmark that a lot of people might know?
Yeah, it's about 150 miles away from Los Angeles proper, from the city. It's in the middle of the desert.
So that, so that's
Joshua Tree High Desert area.
Right. It's a couple hours out there.
Yeah, it's a couple hours out there. The closest cities would be Los Angeles and Las Vegas are the two closest cities.
Oh, that sounds like a great place to bury a dead body or abduct a family.
Or get abducted. Now, this guy, he told this story, and we always approach them skeptically. I have to. If I'm not skeptical about my cases, somebody else is going to be, and I'm going to look like a fool down the line. But everything just sort of, this was, the emotions were right when the guy was telling his story. This guy is a big oil worker. He's intelligent, but he's a hands-on oil worker. And one of those guys where, you could tell that he didn't care for any kind of funny business. Not a fan of UFO shows. When this happened to him, he really kind of suffered from ontological shock afterwards, where it seemed like his idea of reality was pulled out from under him, like a magician would pull the tablecloth out from your dinner, Now,
going back real quick, what year did this happen in? So, like, what year did you start investigating? What year did this happen in?
It was a historic case. This happened back in 1993 was when this happened to him and his family. And it took him that long to feel comfortable enough to actually tell his story. He heard about MUFON. Before that, he didn't know who to contact or who to talk with. And I think that perhaps he saw the Hainer 1 show or something where, MUFON played a heavy part in that, where they did mention that you could go and report your UFO at MUFON.com. But the thing about this is that, when he was telling me the story, they stopped. It was around just after dusk. And he'd stopped to use nature's bathroom, and the stars were all really bright around him, and he called his wife out and said, "Hey, look, it's so beautiful out. Look at all the stars." And as they're watching the stars, they seem to be aggregating together into like a circle, which is not what stars
are. Right.
Yeah. And he said that they started, it looked like they were actually coming together, and as they're watching this, they start falling to the ground. This is far, like a couple miles away from them in the desert, but he and his wife are watching as they're like approaching him. They're approaching, and the kids, you have to remember, there were 3 kids that were in the station wagon. One was a newborn. It was the first trip that they had ever taken their newborn son on, because they were going to show him off to the relatives up in Bakersfield area. So they watched these stars falling to the ground, and they knew that something wasn't right. He turned to his wife, and she wasn't there. She wasn't where she had been standing. He's confused. He's looking around, and he sees that she's in the middle of the street behind the car. And he said that she spoke in a voice that was her voice, but not her voice, is the way that he said. She said, "Don't worry, they're not going to harm us." He watched these stars approaching on the desert floor towards his car, towards his family, when he noticed this red light playing in the scrub that was off to the right of himself, this a couple feet away. And he said that it felt like it was diverting his attention somewhere else, like you would play with a cat with a laser pointer. So he's watching this red light, he said, like sort of like a round shaped, like an orb is I guess the way that you would describe it. When suddenly both he and his wife were overtaken by this silver flying saucer. He said it looked like it was straight out of the day the earth stood still. Like right out of he said, a gaudy flying saucer. He said that the surface was mirrored.
Wait, Klaatu Verata, crap your pants.
Yeah. Exactly.
That would be the end of that thing for me. I'd be
seriously.
The real terror here, I think, is that number one, he sees his wife. He can't protect his wife, and he's got 3 children in the back seat, and he can't protect his children.
Yeah,
so the feeling of powerlessness that would have to, just wash over you, in addition to the, blowing out your mind here that you're seeing something, anyway. So no, please continue. I'm picturing it, and I'm feeling for the guy in an experience of not only like the ultimate kind of emasculation. There's nothing you can do.
There's nothing you could do about it. And this isn't a story that this guy would want to tell because, again, he looks a little bit like Bruce Springsteen. He's a big guy and no nonsense guy. And you're right. He felt completely powerless. Well, the next memory that he had, now he watched this thing and he said that it took off past them so fast that he couldn't even track it. And the next thing he knows, he and his wife are leaning up against the bumper of their car, and it's about 7 o'clock in the next morning. No memory of all the hours that had passed. His sons were still, the baby was still in the baby seat. The other 2 sons were in the back seat. And that's how he found himself and his family. Wow. The wife would not talk about it. She thought it was the devil. She became very, very religious after this happened. Was never religious before, and suddenly became a heavy churchgoer, and she would not want to talk about it, and he did want to talk about it. One wound up ruining their marriage ultimately.
One thing I wanted to ask about you real quick, Earl, about this story, and one thing about missing time cases in general, and this is going to sound probably crass, and I do not mean it to sound crass, is that with a missing time case, and I'm just thinking about Wendy and I have been on maybe 1,000 road trips together with our band and stuff, and it always comes down to you got to go to the bathroom sometimes. No, and I just want to say, when you're talking about proof of something, right? When you're talking about proof of something, and you say like missing time, like I'm always interested, and especially this guy has a missing time case with his family, with a kid in the back, diapers, kids, notoriously unreliable bladders. And I just mean like, that's always something that I kind of think about when you're saying like, well, how did the missing time go? Like, when did you go to the bathroom? Or when you came out of it, did you have to go to the bathroom? And
somebody changing that kid's diapers? That's the other
right.
question.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So apparently everything was just normal, like they had a babysitter. Did they have a little alien babysitter?
Right. Who helped out? Was it a fresh diaper on the kid?
Abducted? Was a car lifted up into this thing? I mean, we don't know. And he's not comfortable with having hypnotic regression done. He's scared of what he might find out. He already feels vulnerable from what he remembers himself. And we've talked about it. I have kind of, I go back and forth with my feelings about hypnotic regression. I strangely, I was talking about the Look magazine and Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah.
I experience a lot of synchronicity in my life, and one synchronicity is that I actually work for Kathleen Marden as my boss at MUFON's Experiencer Research Team. I'm a member of the ERT, and that's who my boss is. And we have a meeting today. In fact, I have a Zoom meeting with MUFON's ERT.
Even during a pandemic, the aliens haven't taken time off.
They have not taken time
right, because
off.
They can't get. Well, actually, the coronavirus can jump species, so like that, they should be worried.
Nice.
Yeah, you're right. That maybe that is an issue. Who knows?
They have enough space, though. They're very good at the distancing aspect of it.
Right. They can socially distance.
One thing I've noticed is it seems like like UFO reports have slightly gone down a little bit because people aren't outside very much right now. But the people who are experiencers that experience being taken or visited by entities, those are up. So it seems like visits and abductions are there's a lot going on there. That has kept me so busy recently. Regular UFO.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean by like, okay, so these are people who take like Whitley Strieber, for example. So if you guys have read Communion, we've talked about Communion on this podcast a million times. But Whitley Strieber is someone who was taken as, like, he remembers being taken as a child, and he was taken repeatedly throughout his life.
Yes.
So you mean people who report multiple abduction experiences have had more experiences during this particular time?
Yes. Visits and abductions are up right now. I've seen a significant uptick in those, and usually that's the case. Usually, for some people they'll be taken once. People will have one experience, but the lion's share of these cases, they usually start when the person's a child, and they keep on going on. Oftentimes. Seems like for women it happens until the end until they go through menopause, which perhaps it's because they're gathering ova, is something that we hear quite a bit of.
Real quick, Earl, I wanted to ask you. You just mentioned something. You said something about feeling, you have your own issues or own thoughts about hypnotic regression. And that's something we've discussed on this podcast a lot, because I remember in my psychology classes, one of my colleagues went on to work with, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus at the University of Washington, and she was on the board of the Committee for the Scientific Claims of Investigation of the, PSYCOP, the famous skeptical organization. And, and so we've talked about between talking about satanic panic and implanting memories into people and stuff like that, the dangers of hypnotic regression, what do you think that you've seen maybe in discussions with, and I guess if you are investigating in Southern California, where everybody has a shrink in the first place, that's, that's kind of where is a good place to say, like, well, what about hypnotic regression? What are your personal thoughts on that, that you've discovered?
I think that it works sometimes. I think that it's a tool, that it's a useful tool, but that you have to be very, very careful, and you have to be very careful about not suggesting things or implanting memories. That is an issue. Kathleen uses a method called quantum healing regression, and it's very time consuming. It kind of compartmentalizes every aspect of the regression, and you have to make sure that the person is okay with those feelings, and that you sort of have the little switch that you leave there to where you can turn those memories off if they're going to be harmful to that person. So it's a very time-consuming and difficult way of doing it, but I think that that's the best way of doing hypnotic regression. In fact, that's the only method that I would personally be okay with one of my cases doing.
Now, have you had a chance from the live audience on YouTube, Sam, a tool used in the wrong way can be a weapon?
Yes, absolutely correct. Yeah, I agree.
And so have you been on hypnotic regression sessions along with it? Like, have you had a chance to be there?
I have never been in a hypnotic regression session, not myself. I am usually the guy who tells my witnesses that maybe they don't want to have hypnotic regression done. I kind of think that that it's the gift of forgetfulness, that you wouldn't want to remember a surgery that you had. And it's the same kind of thing. There's a reason why they put you out. But for some people, it just gnaws at them, and it makes their lives to where they're unmanageable. They really have to know. And if it gets like that, then I do have a list of hypnotherapists that use the quantum healing method. It's out of the person's pocket. It's not connected to MUFON. We don't have hypnotic. We don't have hypnotists that are part of MUFON. That
on the payroll. You can't just be like, exactly. It always makes it sound, when you watch TV shows or whatever, they're always like, well, first of all, they always make every small town look like it has like a paranormal investigator and an occult shop, and oh yeah, we'll talk to the local shaman kind of thing.
There isn't always that. There usually isn't. I can usually find somebody. It's within a couple 100 miles of the person. So if they really, really, really want to do it, then I have people that I can send them to. But I'm very cautious about it. My feeling is that if you have any memory whatsoever of it, that you don't want to dilute that or take the chance of messing up what you do retain by possibly embellishing it that way. But Bud Hopkins. I'm good friends with Peter Robbins, who is Bud Hopkins' assistant, and of course,
we love Peter.
Yeah, Peter's great. He's dear. He's one of my mentors that I go to, and his feeling about it is, he says, I always tell them, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in.
No,
that's a fact.
And that's the thing about investigation. And I was just telling somebody this the other day that, like, once the narrative has been created, and I'm not talking about like political narratives, I'm talking about just a narrative of some kind of folklorish, when you talk about aliens or, any kind of paranormal kind of thing, once that's kind of out there, then people see things if they see something crazy or they see something like, wow, that's a paranormal activity, they're going to adjust their experience to fit the narrative. And I think this brings on the next question, actually from one of our Patreons, Mark, and Mark's got a quick question too. I wonder how difficult it is filtering out actual experiences from hoaxes, especially with the available technology right now and everyone looking for their 15 minutes of fame. We've all seen Paranormal Caught on Camera.
Oh gosh.
Right? And that's like every Eastern European special effects house. That's their audition reel. Is Paranormal Caught on Camera. And so as someone that has to kind of filter that to see what cases are, and this is, I love like how-to episodes for our listeners, because you're someone that has to often filter between not just crazy, but hoaxers, people looking for attention. You live in a land of people trying to make their name in entertainment. And so how do you navigate that and finding out like what cases are going to be worth your and MUFON's time and attention and resources when there are so many people who are just looking to make a headline because it might further their career?
You want to do multiple interviews with a person. You want to have other witnesses is very important, and you don't always get other witnesses. So, but when you do, I mean, you've got to check the stories, and I take very meticulous notes. And if the person, if they're trying to impress me, or they're trying to, they'll usually give themselves away. They'll usually say something like, "Oh, well, I really want to be on a TV show," or "Do you think that you could, is this, do you know anybody that would like to write my story up in a book?" Or, they'll usually, oftentimes they'll just come right out and say that stuff. And so that there's, a problem there. But other times, I've personally closed over 500 cases, UFO cases. And of those 500, I have, I believe, like right around 40, a little over 40 cases that I have given the unknown classification to, that where it is a UFO or this is something anomalous. So my numbers are actually lower than Hynek's. He said that it was 90 to 95% of UFO reports are prosaic, and I have a little less than that because I'm very, very careful, very meticulous. If I can't, if I don't have other witnesses on board, or if the person changes even the slightest detail, that's, I'm going to give that an insufficient data classification. So I'm really, really, really careful. Now, I've had people that have tried to run hoaxes past me, and I'm pretty good at catching them. Because usually if it looks too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Is there any
CGI stuff?
Yeah.
I do detective work on people. I had one person that put in a video that seemed too good to be true. And I did a little detective work on them, and I found them on the internet with their company that was their little creed was CGI so close to reality it's realer than real. Right?
Wow, nice.
And stuff like that, and it's pretty obvious. I've had other people where I had one guy that had supposedly a black triangular UFO, like a TR-3B, where it was a kite, and he had a little laser in the middle, and he had the three little red lights, one to a corner.
Oh, he used the laser. And, he had lasers on the kite?
Yeah. He did.
Smart.
And so, this was over at Venice Beach. It was like 2:00 in the morning. And so I go back and I check the weather reports. This thing, you see this thing hovering like without any visible means of propulsion, so to speak. And then suddenly it goes crashing into the ocean. So I'm going, well, I didn't get called out on a UFO crash last night. It wasn't on the news. There wasn't any strange stuff going on. So I checked out the weather report. And if you go to weatherunderground.com, you can get a minute-by-minute report. Now, this guy had the readout on the video of what time it had been taken. And the wind happened to completely die down suddenly from like 5 miles an hour to 0. And that's when his kite went into the drink. So that was a quick hoax.
Well, why I love that story is, number one, not enough paranormal investigators look at the weather. I feel like that's the number one thing when you see an anomaly is like, check the weather, check the phase of the moon, check all that stuff. Like, because let's get those out of the way first before we get to the crux of it. But if it's explainable, if it's prosaic by the weather,
the stuff we know is actually in the sky.
What's your greatest disappointment, Earl? Like, what's something that you're like, oh my God, this is gonna be such a great story. This case is gonna make my career. This case is gonna make the news. This case is gonna change the world. And then it ended up you found, like, maybe you got to a certain level of like excitement, and then you ended up having to bring it back because you're like, okay, I found an issue. What makes me think about this, we were talking with Nick Redfern last week about
great guy.
The Rendlesham, his new book, and the Rendlesham Forest conspiracy and his ideas. And I think about Peter Robbins. He put so much work into that book, and having to say that, well, I can't stand by the claims that Larry Warren made in this book anymore. And Peter, he expresses the case for extraterrestrial weirdness at Rendlesham so well. To have to kind of walk that back is a heartbreaker. Have you had any heartbreakers where you're like, I think I got something really great here, and then you had to walk it back at the end?
I've had quite a few of those, really. And usually it's where they change their story, or they trade. I had one that looked pretty good recently. It looked like it was this guy had a landing of a triangular UFO in his backyard, and there was a patch of grass that you could see that was discolored, and it seemed to repel water, which we hear from a lot of landing spaces when there's a UFO that actually lands. It looked like it was a really good case, and then the guy started embellishing, and he actually changed the size of the craft.
What? No.
Yeah, to where it would have been too large to have, because he wanted to bring in that he saw entities, and it's like, well, unless they were the size of an action figure, they wouldn't fit it in this thing. And so the guy slowly, as UFOs started getting larger, and so that was disappointing. But you have to, you gotta be a skeptic yourself, or else people are going to do it for you. And Peter, what a great guy. And that the gentleman that you mentioned who embellished his story, that Peter wrote the book with, that shows so much integrity on Peter's part.
Mm-hmm. Sure does.
He had to talk back. He took that book off the market. I have a copy here that's signed by both Larry and by Peter.
Wow.
I don't even like to say the other guy's name.
Right.
He hears about it, and he'll just like start threatening you and stuff. It's like, I just don't need that negativity.
Wow. No.
But Peter is just such a man of high integrity, and I think that everybody is capable of falling for a hoax. I'm capable of it. I've come close a couple of times, and whenever that happens, it just reminds me that you got to be the number one. I have to be my own Philip Klass. If you know who Phil Klass was, he was
prick.
He was a prick. And I'm so glad that Stanton Friedman got the $1,000. He won a bet with him, where he told Stanton that he'd pay him $1,000 if he could prove this one case, and he did.
Awesome.
And Philip Klass came through. He wrote him the check, and I think Peter he never even cashed it. He just kept that under glass on his wall.
It's right. It's more important. Like, your integrity does not have a dollar sign associated with it.
No.
Which, and this leads to a question, because you have probably experience with so many different investigators and authors and everything, people looking to make a name for themselves. Also, it's trying to make a couple of bucks in a life where it's hard to make a couple of bucks, where, paranormal, the world of the paranormal, Zach Baggins fans might lead you to believe different, but the world of the paranormal is not full of dollar signs.
It's not lucrative.
Like, you go to these conventions and stuff like that.
Either.
Even the guys that are on Travel Channel and all these things like that, they're still, they're still doing autographs and things like that to make a couple of bucks, and so they can feed their kids. But
Stanton Friedman had a second job. People don't know that, but he was a consultant. He was an internet consultant, and there isn't a lot of money in ufology. There isn't money in it. I think that perhaps if you've got an Ancient Aliens show or something like that, then maybe you're doing a little better. But I've guested on Travel Channel shows, and there's no money in it. The best that you'll get is maybe you'll get plane fare in a hotel overnight, and that's kind of it. And $250 in the pocket seems to be the upper end of what you get paid.
Right.
So you certainly can't make your living off of it. If you're an author and you do cruises, which nobody is doing right now, cruises. I know that Kathleen Martin works very, very hard. I've seen the amount of work that she puts into what she does, and the care and how meticulous she is in writing her books. And if you're at the MUFON Symposium or Alien Con or what have you, you're not going to see Kathleen yucking it up at the bar or anything. She's working hard, selling her book, doing autographs, talking with people, and boy, I sure look up to her. She's one of my great heroes in this field, because there's no nonsense. She's very, very, you have to be open-minded. But as my mentor and state director Jeff Krause says, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Right. I love that.
Well, one of the reasons I want to ask about this is because I'm thinking about this in relation to one of the examples is that another person that lives in Wisconsin, we've had on the podcast several times for our especially for our Stanton Friedman tribute last year, is Don Schmidt.
Oh yeah.
And Don is a great researcher. He's a good author. But the Roswell slides, and I remember when the Roswell slides came out, I called Don. I'm like, we got to get you in the pod. We got to talk about it today, before it comes out. And Don's like, absolutely. And
the mummy.
Right. And it was like some Peruvian. It was all bullshit.
Oh, it's total bullshit.
And that Don would come in and put his name behind it broke my heart a little bit, because I consider him
a few people did,
who worked so hard. He's been working so hard on Roswell for so long. And I always think that maybe, and this is the defense of it, but I want to hear what you think, that maybe guys like Don, who've been working for something for, 30 or 40 years, and still no one takes them seriously because they're like, UFOs, whatever. He's like, well, if it gets me money towards a smoking gun, I'll take it, kind of thing. Like, if it gets me closer to giving people incontrovertible proof, I will take it, even if it diminishes my integrity before I get there. And I was just wondering if you'd seen any examples of that, or in your ufologist history?
Everybody is capable of falling for a hoax, unfortunately, you know. You'll see something and it gets you excited, and it looks like the ducks are all lined up, and then it all comes falling apart in the end. And so you have to be so careful, and I'm so careful about putting my name behind something. You know, it's like the Tic Tac UFO when all that first came out.
The Tic Tac is the
what happened off of the Baja coast here, with the Princeton and the Nimitz aircraft carrier, where the
Tom DeLonge thing that was in the New York Times, yes, and everything like that, and the
New York Times broke the story, and Kevin Day and I know a lot of the players there. David Fravor was the top Top Gun pilot that they sent out. With that, you know, I mean, it seemed like everything was so good about it right up front, but I was still really cautious about putting my stamp of approval on it. And eventually, after talking with enough of the people that were involved, there were some things that were really good proof to me. Like, for instance, Kevin Day wrote the whole story out, except in a fictional form back in 2008, and self-published a little book, just so he would have that story, that it was available out there. And it was pretty much exactly word for word what happened out there. So there we had, for me, you know, that was proof that independent of the other pilots, that this gentleman was telling pretty much the whole core story word for word before it was out there in public. So I did, you know, jump on the bandwagon with that, and I'm actually glad, you know, because it's really kind of been the gift that keeps on giving. The Pentagon, of course, recently came out and said, yes, that was a real incident. It was a UFO. It wasn't us. We hope it wasn't Russia or China, because if it was, you know, we can't do that.
Screwed.
We're screwed. You know, and this thing you have to remember is 40 feet by 20 feet. It was going Mach 18. Without creating a fireball, without creating sonic booms. It was breaking Newton's laws of physics. You know, the law of energy compensation says that should have become a fireball, that it should have been the loudest thing, that it should have sounded like a meteor smashing into the earth, and it should have smashed into the ocean, but no, it stopped. And did 90-degree turns like you'd see something in a Roadrunner cartoon do. So that wasn't us, and it's a brilliant case. And I'm really glad that I did, you know, give that my stamp of approval when everybody else wasn't. But it's not always like that. You know, oftentimes you'll have stuff that's a lot harder to prove, and I'm very careful about, you know, about saying that something's a UFO. I'm so careful about it.
Sure.
Because you can't get your integrity back, you know?
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that's a great way to end the podcast here. Earl, you know, for people who are listening here and they want to hear more of what you have to say, and they want to learn more about your UFO research, where can they find you online?
You know, the best spot is just go to Facebook and look for Earl Grey. You know, my full name is Earl Grey Anderson. And the Grey part was a musician name. That was me being cute back in the 1980s. But it kind of works with the UFO thing. You know?
Absolutely.
Gray aliens and all
Gray
that
aliens.
stuff.
Obviously, that was Captain Picard's favorite tea. And
yeah, exactly. And now I chose I chose that pseudonym before Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, so I beat Picard bunch there, or to the machine anyway. But that's a good way to get a hold of me, and I do keep my page open. I think I'm at the 5,000 friend point right now, so I can't take on new friends, but you can always, you know, I don't have my Facebook account restricted, so anybody can ask me questions, and if you message me, I'll certainly message you back and talk with you and email with you, or and if you know, if you have seen a UFO, you think you've seen a UFO or you've had a strange experience that you think is synonymous with what we've been talking about, go to MUFON.com, MUFON.com, the Mutual UFO Network. The first thing you'll see when you go to the front pages is it'll say, report a UFO. You just click on that. It'll take you right to a document. It'll take you like 10, 15 minutes to fill it out. And a field investigator will investigate your case. It's a promise. If you're in Southern California, I will see the case myself. I might even take it myself. So that's what to do if you've seen a UFO. Also, MUFON is a wonderful, it's just kind of like a clearinghouse of ufology. It's all there. I love the organization. We've been in business for 51 years now, doing the Air Force's job for 51 years. They quit Project Blue Book, and that's when we sort of started MUFON. So there you go.
Perfect.
Fantastic. So make sure you guys
Thanks
check
for
that out.
joining us.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us, Earl. Now, for everyone else who's going to find this on YouTube later, or for the people who are watching on YouTube now, Earl, why don't you play a song for us?
Sure, I can do
If
that.
you would be so kind.
Yes, we would love to hear you play a song for us.
I didn't know if we were going to be doing that or not because we kind of ran over, but sure.
No, we just this for the after show
Bonus
kind of thing,
content.
And then plus we'll put this in the Patreon and anybody on YouTube and stuff. But also we love it, and the fact is we didn't get a chance to talk about your musical influences and paranormal music, and that's a whole show we can talk about at a different time. Just because
you have me back, I'd love to talk about.
We had plenty of great UFO stuff to talk about. The fact that your mother used to work for Howard
awesome.
Hughes I was like, holy shit, that's awesome.
I'm glad that you like that. Yeah, I have to pinch myself still a little bit, but it's true. And well, she went back into aerospace. So I saw, the other thing that's really interesting, I tried to get more information about Hughes and about the underground city. I was maybe 21, 22 years old, and my mom was getting a little frustrated. And then she came back and had a little grin on her face, and she said, "I'll tell you something else about the little underground city. You were down there, Earl." And I'm like, what? She said, yeah. The last time that I went down there, I was pregnant with you.
Nice.
A couple months later, you were in my tummy, is how she said. She said, you were in my tummy. So technically, you were down there, too. So I don't know if
that's cool.
My DNA.
That's great.
Too bad you couldn't get a T-shirt.
Yeah, really.
I visited the underground city.
Whatever it was, I don't know.
A T-shirt or rubber gloves or Howard Hughes would have to be Kleenexes or something, right?
Yeah.
Like what would be
or a onesie.
There are more funny stories because he was paranoid.
Right.
My mom only saw him in person once. It would everything he would do over the intercom system. It was like Charlie's Angels.
Oh wow!
It's like Angels. Honest to God. Anyway, I'm going to play a song for you called "Seventh Sister."
Fantastic.
This is kind of plays into the UFO thing. You can sort of see this as just talking about the 7 stars of the Pleiades. Used to be 7 naked eye objects, and now you can only see 6 of them by the naked eye. One of those stars dimmed.
Oh.
And I always thought, what if that was somebody's lucky star way back, years ago, and suddenly it dimmed. And then it also sort of has sort of a little fantasy love relationship with perhaps somebody from the Pleiades. You can take it however way you would like to.
Sounds good. All right. And here's Earl Grey, coming all the way from California.
Sun diving for a dream, scintillas in the stream, hoping for what's true. I'm trawling for honor
in this shallow pool. Borealis stolid crown arches over the Puget Sound. Berenice's hair drapes the horizon to fill the air. Where is my lucky star tonight? The seventh sister of the Pleiades, who walks in a beauty like the night, all that is best of dark and bright. Now lost to me, I only trust in the northern star. That's the only point that's fixed. I once believed in love, but even love cannot bridge this rift. Where is my lucky star tonight? The seventh sister of the Pleiades, who walks in beauty like the night, all that is best of dark and bright. Now lost to me, there is no bridge, there's nothing here. You just diminished in your magnitude until you disappear. Where is my lucky star tonight? The seventh sister of the Pleiades, who walks in a beauty like the night, all that is best of dark and bright. Now lost to me, now lost to me. Where is my lucky star? It's the only point that's fixed
Yay!
Oh, that was terrific. That was terrific. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Very
guys.
nice. Very nice. Beautiful.
so make
yeah,
sure-
I like that a lot.
Make sure you
Thank you.
Make sure you out there find Earl on Facebook. And you can find the show notes for this episode at othersidepodcast.com/299. We'll have links to everything, including some of Earl's music. And we will have a song that is inspired by today's conversation. Once again, thank you, Earl, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so
My
much, Earl.
pleasure. Thank you, Wendy.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. You guys take care.
And anybody out there,
Yeah, you
anybody
too.
out there in the world of YouTube, it was good to see you.
Thanks for watching.